It was late November when Jordan moved into his new apartment. He had just graduated college and found a small, cheap place downtown. The building was old, the kind with creaky pipes, uneven floors, and thin walls where you could hear every neighbor's footsteps. Still, it felt like the perfect first place to start fresh. At first, nothing seemed strange. The first night was quiet. The second night, though, Jordan woke to the sound of knocking. 3 slow knocks, echoing in the stillness. He thought it was just someone at another door, but when he checked the peephole, the hallway was empty. Shrugging it off, he went back to bed. The third night, it happened again. 3 knocks. Not on the hallway door this time, on the wall right next to his bed. He pressed his ear against the plaster, thinking it was a neighbor. But when he knocked back, no one answered. From then on, the nights got stranger. Sometimes when Jordan turned off the lights, he swore he heard whispering. Not loud, not clear, but faint murmurs like 2 people talking in another room. He lived alone. One night, after a long shift at work, Jordan came home around midnight. He dropped his bag, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed on the couch. As he drifted toward sleep, he heard the sound again, the knocking. 3 slow thuds, steady as a heartbeat. This time, though, it came from inside the apartment. From the kitchen. His body froze. He wanted to believe it was pipes or the fridge making noise, but deep down he knew better. He forced himself up, walked to the kitchen, and turned on the light. Nothing. Everything was still. Then, as he turned to head back to the couch, he saw something that made his stomach drop. The kitchen chairs were pulled away from the table. All 4 of them spread out like someone had been sitting there waiting. Jordan panicked, checked the locks, even searched the closets. No one was inside. He convinced himself he must have left the chairs that way, though he knew he hadn't. He pushed them back under the table and tried to sleep. That night he had the strangest dream. In it, he was lying in bed, unable to move. A figure stood in the corner, tall and dark, with no face. It whispered his name over and over. When he tried to scream, nothing came out. He woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, and swore he could still hear the whisper echoing in his ears. The following days, things escalated. He'd find objects moved around, keys on the counter instead of by the door, cabinets left wide open. Sometimes he'd hear footsteps pacing in the hallway when he was alone. The final straw came on a stormy night. Rain pounded against the windows, and thunder rattled the building. Jordan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the usual creaks of the apartment. Then 3 knocks. This time, they came from the closet door inside his bedroom. He sat up immediately, heart racing, eyes fixed on the closet. The knocks came again, louder. Summoning his courage, he grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the bed, walked to the closet, and yanked the door open. Nothing, just his clothes hanging neatly. No intruder, no explanation. He sighed in shaky relief, telling himself it had to be his imagination. But when he turned to go back to bed, he froze. Someone was sitting on the edge of the mattress. For only a second, he saw her, a woman, pale, with long black hair covering most of her face. She wore what looked like a hospital gown, torn and stained. Her head tilted slowly toward him, and though her eyes were hidden, he felt her stare pierce through him. In an instant, the figure vanished. Jordan dropped the bat, backed against the wall, and stayed there until sunrise, too afraid to move. The next morning, he packed a bag and left the apartment. He never returned. When he broke the lease, the landlord didn't seem surprised. "People don't usually last long in that unit," the landlord muttered. Jordan never asked why. But sometimes, when he stays at a friend's house, or even in his new apartment across town, he swears he still hears it. 3 slow knocks. Darren was driving through the Midwest, a long stretch of empty highways and cornfields in every direction. He'd been on the road for 12 hours and was too tired to keep going. Just after midnight, he spotted an old roadside motel with a neon sign that flickered weakly, vacancy. The place looked half abandoned, paint peeled from the walls, weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement, and only 2 other cars sat in the lot. But Darren didn't care. He needed a bed. Inside the office, the manager barely looked up from his newspaper. He was an older man with sunken eyes and a flat voice. "Only 1 room left," he muttered, sliding a key across the counter. "Room 6. Darren paid cash, grabbed the key, and headed to the room. The hallway smelled of mildew, and the lights buzzed overhead. When he unlocked the door, the first thing he noticed was the damp, heavy air inside, like the room hadn't been opened in months. The furniture was dated, the carpet stained, and the curtains drawn shut. Still, exhaustion won. He tossed his bag down and collapsed onto the bed. At first, he thought he'd finally found peace, but as he started drifting off, he heard a soft shuffle, like feet moving slowly across the carpet. He sat up, heart thumping, and looked around. The room was empty. He checked the bathroom, no one. He even peeked under the bed. Nothing. Convincing himself it was his imagination, he turned out the light and tried again. That's when he heard breathing. Not his own. It was coming from the corner of the room, slow, steady, ragged. Darren turned the lamp back on. The corner was empty. Just a worn chair and an old dresser, yet the sound lingered, low and labored, like someone straining to inhale. He told himself he was overtired, that the mind plays tricks when you're running on no sleep. But then came the scratching, gentle at first, then louder. It was coming from inside the closet. His skin prickled. He stood frozen, staring at the closet door. The scratching stopped. Silence. Finally, he forced himself forward and pulled the door open. Inside, only a few wire hangers swayed slightly as if disturbed, but there was nothing else. He shut the closet quickly, crawled back into bed, and tried to stay calm. But just as his eyelids closed, a voice whispered, low, raspy, right by his ear. Darren shot upright, his chest tight, scanning the room in panic. No one was there. The door was still locked, the curtains still closed, but the voice had been real. He didn't sleep after that. Instead, he sat up in bed, the lamp burning, until dawn lit the sky. By morning, it was almost easy to dismiss the night as stress, exhaustion, maybe even a half-dream. He packed his bag quickly, eager to leave, but when he stepped outside, something froze him in place. The manager was waiting in the hall. He stared at Darren with those same sunken eyes and asked, "You stayed in room 6? Darren nodded slowly, uneasy. The manager didn't blink. Most people don't make it through the night in there. Darren frowned, trying to laugh it off. Why? Bad plumbing? Rats? The manager's expression didn't change. His voice dropped to a near whisper. A man was murdered in that room years ago. They found him sitting in the chair, his throat cut open. Said he tried to crawl to the door, but he bled out before he could. Some folks swear he never left. A chill ran through Darren's body. He didn't want to hear more. He shoved his bag over his shoulder and headed for his car. But when he glanced back one last time, he noticed something that stopped him cold. The curtain in room 6 was pulled open now, just a few inches. And behind the glass, someone was standing there, watching him leave. Maya had grown up in a small town surrounded by forest. The kind of town where kids wandered trails after school and bonfires were the only real entertainment on weekends. The woods weren't scary to her. They were normal, safe. That changed one fall evening. Maya was driving home after visiting a friend who lived on the far edge of town. The sun had set, and the 2-lane road back was unlit, swallowed by trees pressing close on both sides. She knew the road well, but that night it felt different, isolated, too quiet. About halfway down the stretch, she noticed something strange in her headlights. A shape on the side of the road. At first, she thought it was a deer. She slowed down, hands tight on the wheel, but as the beams hit it fully, her stomach dropped. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He was standing just inside the tree line, not moving, facing the road. His clothes looked dirty, his posture stiff. But what struck Maya most was his face. Pale, blank. He didn't react to the car at all. He just stared as she passed, his head following her slowly. Her skin crawled. She pressed harder on the gas, not daring to look back in the mirror. By the time she reached her driveway, she told herself it was nothing. Probably a hiker, someone passing through. But deep down, she couldn't shake the image of his eyes tracking her. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every shift of wind outside the window made her tense. She lived alone, her parents had moved away, and her brother was in college. For the first time, the silence of the house felt hostile. Just after 2 a.m., a noise jolted her awake, a faint crunch. Leaves, twigs, footsteps. Her bedroom window looked out onto the backyard, where the woods pressed close. She sat up slowly, heart hammering, and peeked through the blinds. At first, she saw nothing but shadows. Then her eyes adjusted. Someone was standing in the yard. The same man. He was closer now, just at the edge of the grass where it met the trees. His face tilted upward toward her window. Mia ducked down, breath shallow, pulse racing. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911 with trembling hands. Whispering, she told the dispatcher there was someone outside her house. The minutes stretched like hours as she crouched in the corner of her room, waiting. She didn't dare look out the window again. Finally, red and blue lights washed over the walls. 2 officers arrived, sweeping the yard with flashlights. They searched the woods for nearly half an hour, but found nothing. When they came inside, one of them tried to calm her. "Probably just a trespasser," he said. "Maybe drunk, maybe lost. But we'll keep a patrol nearby tonight." Maya nodded, but she knew what she'd seen. The man hadn't looked drunk. He hadn't looked lost. He'd looked deliberate. For a week, nothing happened. She started convincing herself it was over. Then one morning, she found something taped to her front door. A photograph. It was a picture of her house, taken from the woods. The angle looked straight into her bedroom window. Evan had been searching for a cheap place to rent after starting his first job in the city. Apartments were expensive, so when he found a listing for a basement room at half the usual price, he jumped at it. The landlord was a quiet man in his 60s who barely spoke during the showing. The house itself was large, old, and creaked with every step. The basement room was small but livable, just a bed, a desk, and a tiny window that looked up at the street. It smelled faintly of damp concrete, but Evan figured he could deal with it. The first week went by uneventfully. He kept to himself, working long hours, barely spending time at home. But around the second week, he started noticing little things. At night, lying in bed, he'd hear noises above him. Not the usual footsteps of a landlord moving around, but soft, dragging sounds. Sometimes scratching, like furniture being moved slowly, deliberately. When he asked the landlord about it, the man simply shrugged. Old house. It makes noises. Evan accepted that until one night when he woke up at 3 a.m. He opened his eyes to pitch darkness, the kind that presses in heavy underground. For a moment, he couldn't figure out why he was awake. Then he heard it, breathing, not his own. The sound was low, steady, coming from somewhere in the room. Evan froze. His phone was on the nightstand, but he didn't dare move. He strained his ears, and the sound grew clearer. Someone was in there with him. Summoning courage, he snatched his phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept the beam across the room. Empty. The corners showed nothing. The desk was clear. The small closet door hung open, but it was bare inside. After a tense minute, he convinced himself it had to be his mind playing tricks. He turned the light off and lay back down. But the breathing started again. Closer this time. Right beside the bed. Evan bolted upright, heart pounding, and flicked the light back on. The room was still empty. Terrified, he stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, he confronted the landlord. "Is there any chance someone has a key to the basement? Has anyone been down there?" The landlord looked at him for a long moment before shaking his head. "No one has a key but me. Maybe you should think about moving if it bothers you." The way he said it unsettled Evan more than the noise itself. That night, Evan decided to stay awake with the light on. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion caught up with him, and his eyes drooped. That's when he noticed something. The tiny basement window, the one that faced the street, was blocked. Something was standing in front of it. He crept closer, heart hammering, and saw the outline of a head, pressed just against the glass, unmoving. He stumbled back, grabbed his phone, and snapped a picture before pulling the curtains shut. When he looked at the photo, his stomach dropped. It wasn't just a shadow. The grainy image showed a pale face, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, staring into the room. Evan called the police immediately. When they arrived, they searched the property but found no one outside. The landlord insisted no one could have been near the basement window. It was too small, too high off the ground. But the photo was real. Evan knew what he'd seen. He decided then and there he couldn't stay another night. He began packing his things, shoving clothes into a bag. As he bent down to grab a box under the bed, his hand brushed against something. He pulled it out slowly. A camera. Small, black, with a blinking red light. It had been recording him. Leah had always hated living alone, but after her roommate moved out unexpectedly, she didn't have a choice. The apartment was small and in a rundown part of town, but the rent was cheap. She told herself she could handle it. At first, everything seemed fine. Days passed quietly. Nights, though, were harder. The building creaked constantly, and the pipes groaned whenever the upstairs neighbors turned on the water. Leah tried to ignore it, until she started hearing a voice. It was faint at first, just a whisper when the lights were out, a low murmur that seemed to come from inside the walls. At first, she thought it was neighbors talking late into the night. But the more she listened, the more she realized it wasn't conversation. It was her name. Soft, stretched out, barely audible. Leah. The first time she heard it, she laughed nervously to herself, telling friends at work that she must have been dreaming. But the next night it happened again, clearer this time, louder. Leah. Her chest tightened with fear. She pressed her ear against the wall and the sound grew sharper. Someone was whispering from inside. She called her landlord, who brushed it off. Old pipes, you're probably hearing echoes. He refused to come check. So she tried ignoring it. Earplugs, music, anything to drown it out. But no matter what she did, the whisper slipped through. One night, the voice changed. Instead of her name, it said something else. I can see you. Her blood ran cold. She slammed her lamp on, staring around the room, half expecting someone to be standing there. Nothing, just silence, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Desperate, she invited a friend to spend the night. They stayed up late watching movies, laughing, trying to make light of her paranoia. Around 2 a.m. though, the friend froze, muting the TV. Did you hear that? Leah's stomach dropped. The whisper, low, dragging, from the wall behind the couch. This time it said, don't let her leave. Her friend turned pale. Without another word, they packed their things and left. Leah begged them to stay, but they refused. There's something wrong in that place, they said. That night, Leah barely slept. Every time her eyes closed, the whisper returned, taunting, circling like it moved from wall to wall. The next day, she made up her mind she was leaving. She began packing boxes, stacking them by the door. But as she pulled a suitcase from the back of her closet, she noticed something odd. A hole. Small, hidden behind old coats, just big enough to peer through. Trembling, she crouched and looked inside. The air froze in her lungs. Behind the wall was a narrow crawlspace, and in that crawlspace were blankets. Food wrappers, empty bottles. Someone had been living there. Her stomach lurched. She scrambled back, phone shaking in her hands as she dialed the police. When they arrived, they searched the crawlspace. It stretched farther than Leah thought, winding between the walls of the building. They found signs of life, bedding, clothes, scraps of food, and journals. Dozens of them. Each one filled with scribbled notes, pages and pages. Her name, her daily routine. What time she left for work. What time she showered. What she wore to bed. And in the latest entry, written just hours before. Soon she'll see me. Soon she'll know I've been here all along. Leah moved out that night and never came back. The police never caught him. 5 stories. 5 people who swore what they experienced was real. They moved away. They tried to forget. Some never spoke of it again. But the strange thing about stories like these, they don't really end.